in our final episode of the different types of tea, and today our focus will be on dark teas, or also known as pu'er teas. This is one of the lesser known teas, but it is gaining popularity around the world. And don't be misled, pu'er tea is neither poor in flavor, nor is it poor in its cost. So, if you don't have a cup of tea in hand, go ahead and press the pause button, go brew yourself a cup, and then come back and join me for today's episode of Let's Talk Tea. Hello tea lovers, welcome to Rebecca's Tea Cozy, where we share a love of tea and other things that are cozy to nourish our bodies and our souls. In this series of Let's Talk Tea, we've been discussing and learning more about the 6 different types of tea. We've learned about green tea, white tea, yellow tea, oolong teas, black teas, and today we're going to learn about the last tea, which is pu'er tea. Now, pu'er tea actually has multiple spellings, which I will put at the bottom of the screen, so don't be confused if you see it in one of its different varieties. Now, pu'er tea is a specialty because of a process that it goes through that none of the other teas do, and we're going to be learning about that in just a few minutes. So to get us started, let's talk a little bit about what pu'er tea is and where it comes from. If you order a black tea in the West, you're going to get a black tea that we know of, which we studied last week, a tea that's fully oxidized. If you're in China and you order a black or a dark tea, you're going to get pu'er tea. And that's not because of necessarily the color of the liqueur, although it might be, but it's also because of the color of the leaves. So pu'er tea was actually created several thousand years ago. There's a lot of variance in the history of exactly the starting point of the tea, but it is a very old tea. It originates in the Yunnan Province, and it's named after the city in which it was first marketed, which is Puer City. This tea is also different because it's not traditionally from the Camellia sinensis variety sinensis plant that is common for a lot of Chinese teas, but it's actually made from trees that are several hundred to even 1,000 years old in the Yunnan Province. It's a variety of the tea plant, and it has large leaves, and it actually is grown on a tree. The leaves are plucked a lot of times by native workers who are indigenous to that area. They collect the leaves and then they sell them or take them back to tea farmers or tea producers that turn it into pu'er tea. There are some tea farms that actually have plantations, and they use typically a larger variety of leaves, such as from the Assamica plant, for those, but it is still from the Yunnan province and it undergoes a similar process. As I shared, this tea dates back thousands of years, and it actually has a really important part to play in the trading that used to occur between China and other countries. So the teas, in order to make them easy to export, were compressed into shapes such as bricks or cakes, and as they traveled long distances, they found that the teas wound up fermenting, which one helped them to stay fresher and safer to drink over a period of time, and 2, changed the entire flavor profile of the tea. So because of its stability and actually improvement of flavor with age, these teas became coveted by other merchants and travelers as well. So merchants would pack up their teas in caravans and take them along what became known as the tea horse trade route. And that became a popular route for caravans and merchants to sell the teas, most notably between China and Tibet. So there's a lot of history and purpose behind the creation of this tea, and it was specific to China for a long while, but as I shared in the introduction, that it really has become more well known among other nations as well, partly due to the purported health benefits, which we'll talk a little bit more about at the end of the episode. So before we taste some of the teas that I have that are pu'er teas, we're going to talk about the process that makes this tea different from the other 5 types of tea that we've studied. This process is very familiar to us by now, but let's talk about the process specifically for pu'er tea, as well as the special stage that it goes through. So again, all tea is plucked, and these are plucked from a lot of times the tea trees in the Yunnan Province that date several hundred to even 1,000 years old. The plucking might be 1 bud and 1 leaf or 2 leaves, which is a very fine, high quality, or it might be a larger amount of leaves that are plucked, which would result in a little bit lower quality. Depending on the time of year, as always, it's going to determine the flavor, as well as the size of the leaves, the maturity of the leaves, all of those things that account for the flavor profiles that we've been talking about, as well as the caffeine content. After it's plucked, it's allowed to go through a withering stage, which allows the teas to go through a slight bit of oxidation. But then just like green tea, it's fairly soon after that it goes through a firing stage, a lot of times fired in a wok, and that arrests the oxidation process. It's also called a kill green process. We haven't used that term yet, but that might be a term that you'll hear, kill green. So you kill the oxidation process so it remains green. And then after it is fired, or that oxidation process is stopped, then the tea is rolled in order to bruise the leaves, not for the purpose of oxidation, because that process has been halted due to the firing, but to bring out the essence or the flavor inside the leaves, so that when it goes through the fermentation process later, there's a lot of flavor that's allowed to continue to develop within the tea. So after the rolling stage, which could be by machine or by hand, then it goes through a drying process. This could be a lot of times sun-dried, and that's the more traditional way. However, it's nowadays also done in a more controlled temperature environment. So in a large room with different racks, and that temperature controlled at a very precise level. And then this is the key to where the pu'er tea is different. It's either left loose or compressed, and then it is left to ferment. And this is different from an oxidation process, and a lot of times you'll hear these 2 terms mixed up, where you'll hear oxidation referred to as fermented tea, but this is a process that is a microbial fermentation, which means that there is a bacteria or a yeast present either in the air or in the leaves. Think sourdough breads. They can be wild yeast, made from actual yeast and bacteria that's in the air that's allowed to go into the flour. If you haven't made your own sourdough starter, it's a really cool process. I encourage you to do that. Super simple, but does take a little while, a little finessing. Or it's a commercial yeast or bacteria that's added to the leaves to jumpstart that process. Again, just like sourdough, there are some that are commercially made, and then there's some that are wild made. Of course, the process of fermentation that is done through a natural process with the natural bacteria or yeast that are present is going to take a much longer time. And that is called a sheng pu'er, or also known as a raw pu'er tea. If there is a commercial yeast or bacteria that's added to the leaves to speed up that fermentation process, then it's referred to as a shu pu'er or a ripe pu'er. So if you see either of those terms, that will tell you which process was used, whether it was the natural fermentation or a commercial fermentation. The commercial fermentation started in about the 1970s, and it creates a different flavor and type of tea. I will admit, I've learned that through what I've been watching and learning about pu'er teas. I do not have one, nor have I tried one. I only have 2 sheng pu'er or raw pu'er teas that we're going to taste today. And there is a treat, because I have not actually tasted this one yet. I've been saving it for this episode so that I can experience it with you. This fermentation process that the tea undergoes, whether wild or commercial is what dictates the flavor of the tea, along with all of the other components that we've been talking about, the terroir, the what's plants are around it, when it's picked, when it's harvested, how long it's been withered, how it's been rolled, how it's been compressed. So all of those different components are still important into the flavor of the tea. But pu'er teas in general, because they're fermented, have a flavor profile that may be smooth or fruity. It may have a thick flavor. It may have a mushroomy or an earthy or a musky or a hay type taste to it. Some of them are going to have a more intense flavor based on the process that the pu'er tea goes through, as well as how long it's been allowed to age, is going to determine the color of the tea as well as the flavor of the tea. So raw pu'er teas that have only been aging maybe a couple years are going to be lighter in color. They're going to have more of a floral or a fruity or a grassy flavor, kind of similar to what you would expect from a green tea. Whereas teas that have been able to age for a long time, possibly up to 50 or more years, yes, that long, or the commercially fermented teas that are going to ferment much more quickly, those teas are going to have a stronger, more intense flavor, possibly a thick mouthfeel to them. They're going to have a more astringency, think any type of food that's fermented. And it's also possibly going to have an earthy or a mushroom or a musky or a musty flavor as well. So it's going to vary in its flavor profile as well as the color. Some of these teas, if they've been aged for a really long time and the flavor increases and improves with age, then that can be an investment of lots of dollars. So if you think about wine collectors who purchase fine wines and allow them to age over time and they improve in their flavor as well as their value, pu'er teas are very similar to that. You have some people who collect them and cherish certain ones. Some families in China actually have special pu'er teas that they will pass down through generations or give as a special gift that to a couple who's getting married. Perhaps they only drink it one time a year for those special occasions, and then they store it and save it for those special times. There is a lot of information on how to store pu'er tea so it ages well and improves in flavor, and you can certainly research that if you're interested in investing and keeping some pu'er teas around for a while. So I don't know about you, but I am ready to dive into the two teas that I have today, which are both sheng pu'ers or raw pu'ers, and talk about those flavors. So I will clean our area up and get it ready for our tea tasting. Before we actually steep the teas, let's talk a little bit about the two teas that I'll be tasting today. The first tea is a sheng pu'er, and it's called White Moonlight. And I'd like to read the description to you just because I find it so interesting. I think that's the best way to describe the tea for you. So this tea is produced with an unusual method of withering that is performed indoors or at night under moonlight, hence its name, instead of sun or in the sunlight. This longer period of withering results in the leaves developing atypical flavors for a sheng pu'er. Infusions are crisp and refreshing with less astringency than is found in other sheng pu'ers. It's made from 100 to 300-year-old tea trees, and this tea possesses a rich aroma and a layered natural sweetness. And again, it is from the Yunnan Province, which is where all pu'er teas are made. So you'll notice the colors in this tea. I love how it looks. It's not all dark like some of the cakes or compressed bricks are for pu'er teas, but it's got a lot of color variance in it, and I'm excited to share this tea with you today. Our second tea is a big leaf mini tocha, and tocha refers to the shape that the compressed tea is in, and it looks like this. It's a little mini disc, or it looks like a mushroom cap, and they come wrapped in paper. And these are enough for a single serving. This is recommended for a 16-ounce pot. And so I will unwrap it for you. And you can see how dark that tea is from the fermentation process. Again, they can be compressed into these little individual servings. They can be cakes, which are disc shaped or look like bird nests, or they can actually be in the shape of bricks. The larger shapes of pu'er tea, such as the discs and bricks, are shaved off a little bit at a time, enough for the serving that you want, and then they're wrapped back up and then placed back for storage. You can use a butter knife, or there's actually special pu'er picks that are used to break apart the leaves off of that compressed cake or compressed brick. And then again, it's wrapped back up and stored for the next time that you'd like to enjoy the tea. Pu'er tea is steeped using boiling water or close to boiling. So again, read the recommended directions. For these two teas, they are recommended to have boiling water, which is 200 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. And then the amount of tea, as well as how long you're going to steep it, is again dependent on your flavor profile as well as your style of brewing. These teas are recommended for about 3 minutes for the first steeping. Some pu'er teas are recommended to just do a few seconds, even 10 to 15 seconds, because of the intensity of the flavor. So we're going to try about 2 minutes because, again, you know I don't like my teas too strong, and we'll see what that flavor is like. So I'm going to grab the water, which is now at the boiling point, and we're going to brew our teas. I'll be right back. Our water has reached the boiling point, so I will pour it into our tea containers. And you'll notice that I'm using jars today. I felt that it was important, especially with the tocha or the compressed tea leaves, that it would be neat to see in the glass. And so I wanted to use what I had. Again, remember, it's nothing fancy, but it's what we have on hand that we're going to use. So it's what I have. If you haven't noticed, I love ball jars. They're great for storing. They're great for leftovers. And then I don't have to worry about plastic. So we're going to let these steep for about 2 minutes, and then we will check the aroma of the leaves as well as the taste test. So these have been steeping just about 2, maybe a little bit more than 2 minutes. So I will hold them up so you can see the color of the liqueur as well as how the compressed brick has separated into those individual leaves. Now, pu'er tea is one of the teas that they do recommend rinsing. I didn't do that, but these teas do benefit from a quick rinse to wash away and start also to break up the compression to then allow the flavor to develop. So that is something that if you're fixing pu'er tea, you might want to do as a step. I'm going to use my little tea strainer just to catch any leaves that may be there. And you'll notice as I'm pouring that this is a nice light brew. And now our big leaf mini tocha. You may be able to see the color of the liqueur. The white moonlight tea is definitely lighter than the big mini tocha, Sheng Puer tea. So let's smell the aroma and then we'll taste the teas. This has a really light, sweet aroma to it. Nice floral, sweet floral smell. Very warming. Let's see if the flavor matches. It definitely does. It is smooth and a little bit drying, but it's not as stringent. It just tastes dry after I sip and swallow. It has a sweet flavor to it, a floral flavor. It's very warming, is the best way that I can explain it. It just tastes nice. A mild, enjoyable tea. So let's move to the big leaf mini tocha. Wow, that's a completely different aroma. There's a sweetness to it, but also a mustiness. It's really strong and pungent. I think musty is the best way I can explain it. I am going to look forward to taking a tea class that teaches how to really describe the flavors and the smells as well, because I want to get better at that. Okay, let's see what the flavor is like. Wow, definitely different than this Puer tea. It's intense. It has a little bit of an astringency. It has a bitterness, almost like a dark cocoa, like an intense 100% cocoa would taste, which I do enjoy that flavor. That's what a lot of my chocolate bars are that I eat. Yes, for pleasure, it's 100% or 92% dark chocolate. It has a musky flavor to it. Definitely more earthy. I know some people compare it to like mushrooms, like button mushrooms, that earthy taste or earthy flavor. And I can definitely taste that in this tea. Something that I'm not noticing that you would maybe expect is a lot of times fermented foods have that sour taste to it, and I don't taste that in these teas. It's not a sourness, but it is an earthy or a muskiness. So this was exciting for me to taste this tea. As I've said, I've been saving it for this particular episode, and I'm glad that I could experience it with you. Pu'er tea is something that is fairly new to me. I haven't had it a lot, and as I've been researching and learning more about this particular type of tea, it's really made me excited to try some other teas. They are, a lot of them, on the pricier side, especially if you're going to get an older, higher quality tea, but it sounds like it would be a good investment and something that would be great to share as a special treat with that special someone or an occasion that I want to celebrate. Just for your benefit, this particular tea, the White Moonlight, was is a 2019 loose leaf tea, so it's not that old. This particular tea is a 2013 tea, so this has been aging for 8 years now. So definitely a difference, again, in the flavor based on the ages of these two teas. Now let's talk a little bit about the health benefits and what pu'er teas are known for. So first of all, one of the things that I've heard is getting tea drunk on pu'er tea, and that's attributed to the high levels of L-theanine based on the fermentation process and that aging process, that it brings that out. And so if you drink multiple infusions or steepings of this, that you can actually wind up kind of a little high on the tea because of the good feelings and the excitement that it brings to you. So just a note to pay attention to if you're going to have multiple cups of pu'er tea, and you may not be expecting that. Caffeine levels. We've been talking a lot about caffeine and how variant it is. Same thing with pu'er teas. Surprise. So caffeine levels are can be very intense with pu'er teas, but they can also be very low. So some pu'er teas are good for drinking after meals in the evening, and other pu'er teas you're going to want to have them more in the morning or early afternoon, or if you want a pick-me-up. So you need to be careful with that and know what affect the particular tea is that you're drinking so that you don't wind up all night when you actually need a really good night's sleep. The other health benefits that pu'er tea is especially known for is digestion, stomach ailments, upset stomachs, and also drinking it with some foods that need to be well digested. So if you think about the benefits of fermented products in general, we know that they're very important to our gut microbiomes. And so fermented teas are no different. They really impact positively your gut and your microbiome. So, for instance, the Cantonese are known to drink pu'er tea with dim sum, which is a popular dish, and it's very heavy. So that helps in the digestion of the dinner. Rich desserts, you can find certain pu'er teas that might pair really well with a rich chocolate dessert, which will help it digest, or any type of heavy meal. Pu'er teas are also known for their detoxing properties, again, because of that fermentation process, which is a healthy process and changes the tea to bring out other benefits within it. So people who want to improve their body's health, or it's been a part of weight loss regimens, to drink pu'er tea to help your body detox and get rid of anything that may be harming your body. So pu'er tea is the final tea that we're discussing in our types of tea series here on Let's Talk Tea. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about pu'er tea, or if you've never heard of this tea or never tried it, maybe you're a little curious to do so after this particular episode. If you've been enjoying the series of Let's Talk Tea, then I would encourage you to subscribe, because I am posting weekly episodes of Let's Talk Tea, but also other episodes are coming of tea tastings or experiences or our tea times on Saturdays. So you'll want to be notified when those are available for you. In addition, I encourage you to drop a line in the comments of what pu'er teas you've tried, what do you like about them, what have your experiences been? What's the most interesting tea that you've ever tried? I'd love to hear from you. So don't be shy and drop a comment there. So I look forward to our standing reservation of Let's Talk Tea right here at Rebecca's Tea Cozy. And until then, be blessed with a cup of tea.